With the help of Hashem, we are learning Rosh Hashana Daf Dalid. We are continuing to learn the sugya of Daryavesh, the Persian, who, as we established, was called by the Jewish people for a time, initially, with the name Kodesh. And Kodesh also connotes that we considered him, at least initially, to be a Melech Kasher. And therefore, the Gemara explained that even though we accept the ruling of Rab Chizda, that when the Mishnah says, Be'echad b'Nisan is Rosh Hashana l'Malachim, it only refers to Malchei Yisrael. Malchei Umaso'elam are counted from Echad b'Tishrei. When it comes to Daryavesh, initially we marked his Rosh Hashana like Malchei Yisrael Be'echad b'Nisan. Even though we proved that when Nach speaks about him concluding Ezra leaving the Golus, and then him arriving in Yerushalayim with his group, and we are referring to the year of the reign of Daryavesh. And there it's clear that we are marking Echad b'Tishrei to be the Rosh Hashana for his reign. And the Gemara concluded that correct, that there was a period of time where Shehechmitz, which means that he soured, from when we considered him to have soured, we went back to mark his Rosh Hashana as we do for all the Malchei Umas Ha'olam. And the Gemara is going to challenge that. We're going to have various proofs that indeed that Kodesh or Daryavesh, the Persian, Hechmitz, he soured, he lowered substantially his moral behavior, and therefore we no longer gave him the covet of marking the year of his reign from Echad b'Nisan. Now we're going to learn because of that a very interesting topic, and that is the Chazal tell us that if a person gives tzedakah, I'm giving this to tzedakah in order for my child to live. In other words, it sounds like he's doing a mitzvah for self-serving motivations. Chazal say, Harei ze tzadik gomer. We consider this person to be a complete tzaddik, and we're going to have a very big innovation that it really has to do with the intent of the person who gave the tzedakah, even though the words will be the same. I'm giving this money for tzedakah in order for so-and-so to be well, or for that and that to happen. If the person's kavanah is that regardless what will happen, I'll be happy that I did the mitzvah, indeed, that's a tzaddik gomer. It's a complete tzaddik. But if a person will regret doing the mitzvah, if whatever this person desired to happen did not, then we don't consider that act to be an act of tzaddik gomer. Adarabba, we consider that to be a self-serving person, and that's going to lead back to Kodesh's, or really Daryavesh, the Persian's, tremendous amount of tzedakah that he gave. Nevertheless, he gave it for a condition, and it was a self-motivating condition, and if his condition would not have been fulfilled, he would have regretted it. That's going to be, as we will see, one of the reasons why we no longer considered him to be a Melech Kasher. We're going to clarify the meaning of Shegol. We had a verse on Daf Gimel Amud Beis, where when he was sitting, this is already in his 20th year of his reign, his Shegol, his consort, was sitting beside him, and we'll see various interpretations what that means. And on Daf Dalid, Amud Aleph, towards the end of the Amid, the Gemara is going to refer back to the opening Mishnah, and we're going to focus on the second din in the Mishnah, that Be'echad b'Nisan, Rosh Hashana lo regalim, for the holidays. And as we already spoke out in brief, when we learned the Mishnah, it says in Parshas Kiseitse that when a person makes a vow to bring a sacrifice in the Holy Temple, even though, of course, ideally bring it ASAP, but there is a certain point that if the person does not bring it, they will be violating the negative commandment known as Bal Ta'achar, which means do not delay it. When is one violating Bal Ta'achar? We will really learn that our Mishnah follows the Tanach of Shimon, but there's going to be 5 different opinions amongst the Tanoim when that violation goes into effect. We're going to be learning about the concept of tashlumin, compensation. When it comes to the 3 holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, we, the men who are obligated to go there, aren't only obligated to be there, but we have to come there with 2 sacrifices, with one that's called the oilas re'iyah, or carbon oila, a fully burned carbon, that is connected for us seeing and being seen by God in the temple. There is another sacrifice that's known Shalmei Chagiga, part of which is eaten by the person who brought it and his extended family. He can share it with whomever he likes, as long as they consume it in the old city, in Yerushalayim and HaKodesh. These two sacrifices ideally should be brought on the first day of Yom Tov. If the person did not bring it ideally on the first day, they can compensate by bringing it for the next 6 days. Or in other words, there's a total of 7 days when one can bring these sacrifices. That's called compensation. And we're going to learn that the holiday of Shavuos, that biblically only has 1 day, even though the day after is Bechlal, not Yom Tov, not even Chol HaMoed, but we also have the concept of compensation, that if a person did not bring these two sacrifices as they should have on the first day, they can compensate it for the next 6 days. And by the way, until today, we don't say Tachnun from not only from Shavuos, but until Yud Beis Sivan, because these are days that are designated to make compensation for the sacrifices if the person did not bring it in the ideal state. We're going to learn from where do we know that Shavuos has the compensation. We're going to review something regarding Shmini Atzeres, that Shmini Atzeres is considered a holiday for itself, not for everything a continuation of Sukkos. And actually, there are 6 halachas for which Shmini Atzeres is considered a holiday for itself. There's the mnemonic of Pizar Kishav. We had this in Sukkah. We had this before. We're going to review this, God willing, today. And we're going to apply this general rule of Tofasta Meruba Loi Tofasta. Tofasta Miyuta Tofasta. That sometimes the rule is that if you go for everything, you might go broke. If you grab too much, you might grab nothing at all. If you grab something lesser than everything, then you will succeed. And we will see how this applies to our sugya and much, much more. We left off on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, the last line in the Amid, the end of the Amid. Again, we clarified that Kuresh or Dayavish the Persian at some point soured. And that's why we began counting his years from the first day of Nisan. And then we went to count his years of reign. Like we do for all non-Jewish kings from Echad B'Tishrei. Maskiv Lord of Kahana. How can you say, now this resolved the verse that was speaking about Ezra's journeying to the Holy Land, that he left during the 6th year of his reign. He arrived 18 months later, but during the 7th year of his reign. And he went over 2 Nisans, but only 1 Tishrei. So we are saying that during that time when Ezra journeyed, by then Kuresh was already soured. He was already a non-righteous king. How can that be? But doesn't it say, Daf Daled on the top, that at that time he asked, you let me know, Rashi says, you let me know what exactly is missing. Whatever they require, I will make sure that it will be supplied for in the Holy Temple. And he mentioned the details. This is the king. What's missing? What do you need? If you need B'nai Torah and young bulls, I'll give it to you. This is from the government. V'dichrin and rams, v'imrin and sheep. And all of it should be used le'elavan, le'elokah, shemaya, to be brought up as burnt offerings to the God in heaven. Chintin, wheat, melach, salt, chamar, wine, nishach, oil, kemeimar, koihanayo, dibi Yerushalayim, whatever the koihanim in Yerushalayim say the Holy Temple needs, lehevu misyoiv lahen, should be given to them, yoim yoim, every single day, di loy shalom, without fail. So even during that time, he was supporting the maintenance of the Holy Temple, and that was a big bill to foot. So you're telling me that he was already hechmetz? Look at how much money he was giving to Hashem. So answers the Gemara, Amar loy Rabbi Yitzchak, Rebbe, from you, Rebbe Yurav Kahana, you asked a question from these verses in Ezra. Open up these verses. Miturach means from your bundle. Look inside your source. Let's keep on reading and you'll get their answer. What does it say over there? That he continued to say that the lehevoin mahakrivin nechoichen, that these should be offered as pleasing sacrifices le'elokoshamaya, to the God in heaven, umatzlin, and they should pray l'chaye malka, for the life of the king, ubenoi, and for the life of the king's family. In other words, he linked that donation for them to daven and give a bracha for him and for his family. In other words, Since he was not giving it selflessly, he was giving tremendous amounts of money, but he says, but I want you guys to pray for me. That means he's sour. That means, you see, he's not kosher. It was a self-serving mitzvah. The Gemara counters, what are you talking about? Is a person not meritorious? Even if they give tzedakah contingent on, please pray for me, did we not learn v'hatanya? We have this in Psachim, we have this in Bava Basra, that ha'omer sela zulu tzedakah. If a person gives a sela to tzedakah, and he says, bishvil, I'm giving this in order, sheyichyu b'ni, for my son to live, or bishvil she'eska ba l'chaya ha'olam haba, I want to merit the world to come. So Chazal tell us, harei zeh tzadik gomer. That's a complete tzaddik. So why are we saying that he soured because he did that? So the Gemara says, like kasha kan the braisa harei zeh tzadik gomer is speaking about the Yisrael. If a Jew makes such a donation, what's unique about the Yisrael? Says Rashi at the end of the wide lines, going into the first narrow line on top of the Amid, the fifth line from the top. Shelibo el hashamayim. When a Jew gives tzedakah, he's giving it to God. And v'im miriim le'b'chayav, and if whatever his request was does not happen, his child, God forbid, does not live, etc. He's not going to say, God, you tricked me. I regret giving tzedakah. He'll never say that. He'll say, I was not meritorious. I made a sin. I did something that for some hashgacha pratis, I needed to undergo that challenge. In other words, there's nothing wrong you linking a request to a mitzvah, as long as if your request does not happen the way you wanted it, you're not going to regret doing the mitzvah. I'm just reading inside the Rashi. If they don't get what they asked for, they're going to criticize God. That is where we say that giving tzedakah, linking it to a self-serving request, that already is not. We don't consider that person to be meritorious. That's a tit for tat. That's a person who's doing something for his own personal reasons. Back inside Kambo Evdei Kechavim. Now, look inside the top Tosfos. Now we are saying that a Yisrael, as long as liboy lashamayim, as long as he's doing it for God, no matter what, he'll be happy he did a mitzvah. That's okay. So asks Tosfos, don't we learn in Masechta Avos? I'm reading inside the Tosfos. Al tiyu ka'avadim hamasham shemesarav al manas lakal pras. Don't be like servants who serve the master in order to get a reward. What does that mean? So answers Tosfos, it must be hainu b'uma so'elim. That Mishnah is only referring to non-Jewish people. Now that can be, Pirkei Avos was not written for non-Jewish people. So the Marsha over here, he amends, he adds in the Tosfos that hainu ke'ein uma so'elim. What Tosfos means to say is, linking it to the Mishnah, that it isn't just Yisrael and uma so'elim. If a Jew who's doing a mitzvah, in our case, giving tzedakah, for a merit, I want my child to live. If that Jew will regret giving tzedakah, if his child doesn't live, that's what the Mishnah is saying. Don't serve God that way. But if a person is doing a mitzvah, and no matter the outcome for their person or what they want to happen, they're going to be content that they did the mitzvah, then there's nothing wrong you giving a tzedakah and saying, I'm giving this in order for so-and-so, l'refuah shalema, k'minig Yisrael. Gewaldig. Get back inside over here. Now the Gemara says, V'iba Yisema, we know in the Achmans, I have another source that indeed, that Yavish the Persian, he soured at a certain point. How do we know that? Because regarding how he built the Beis HaMikdash, he requested that nidbachin the even golol tulasa. He says that I would like for 3 rows in the temple proper to be made out of marble, out of stone, and v'nidbach, and 1 row the chadat. We know from the Tanya. If the log is not catching fire, then you got to splinter it. Means wood. 1 row should be made out of new wood. In other words, he made sure that wood should be built in the building. And he said that the nafkas and all of the expenses for the building, min beis malka tisriyab, should be given from the house of the king, from the federal government. But he wanted to make sure that he put 3 rows of stone, but then there should be a row of wood. And lamalei da'avid hachi. Why did he put wood in there at all? Why would he not build the entire building out of stone? You know why? He thought to himself that if the Jewish people will rebel against me or against Persia, then I want to be able to burn it down. So since, even though he gave money and he built it, but he always had it in his mind that if I won't be happy with what they're doing, I'm going to burn it down. So just because he gave money, we don't consider him to be a righteous person. Adarabba, hechmetz. He had that as an option. There's a problem putting wood into the holy temple. What, King Solomon did not do that? It says in Melachim, mamish the same thing, that when Shlomo HaMelech built the first temple, 3 rows were made out of stone or cut stone. And the tur, and 1 row afterwards was 3-1, 3-1, 3-1, was kirusois arazim, where were cedar beams. He also built wood into it. So the Gemara answers, Shlomo Avid Milmaila. The literal pshat is that Shlomo HaMelech put the wooden part on the top, not on the bottom. It was high. And Ve'io and the Kuresh, Daryavish, the Persian Avid Milmata, he built it in the bottom. If you build wood on the top, even if the wood burns, the building will not collapse. If the wood is in the bottom or towards the bottom, then indeed, when you burn the wood, the whole building will collapse. You can say homiletically that Shlomo HaMelech Aved Milmaila, he did what God told him to do, as we know. So the Eibishter wanted to build it in there. His intention wasn't, God forbid, for anything to happen to the Beis Hamikdash. That him, Daryavesh, he Milmata, he was his own mind that decided how to build it. And why did he do it? He did it because he wanted to have the option of, God forbid, burning down the temple. Another difference. Shlomo Shaki Binyan. Shlomo made sure that the wood is completely recessed into the building. And he did not put the wood recessed in. He had it all the way to the outside, again, making sure that you could burn it down. Another third difference, Shlomo Sadiyeh B'Sidon. Shlomo HaMelech plastered it with lime. And he did not plaster it all for the same concept that for whatever advantage there is in putting in wood, and there is, he used that to the disadvantage of having an option of burning it down. Now we're going to have a third source, that Rabbi Yosef or others say that Rabbi Yitzchak, Minalon da Achmetz, they have a third source from where we know that Daryavish soured, became a non-righteous king. It says, we quoted this yesterday, now this is many years later, but so what? Now we're going already into the 20th year of his rule. That when this Nehemiah had this interaction with the king, so the king was telling me, and it says, Vahashegol, Yoisheves Etzloi, the consort, no, I like the concubine, that's the normal pshat. Really, it should be a queen that's sitting next to the king. And my shegol, what does that mean? Amarava Barlima, or Barlema, in the name of Rav Kalbason, that at that time already, he had his female dog, who he mamash married. And she was sitting next to him. And bestiality, without shame, is included in one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. I'm just saying that, as we spoke at the end of last class, that even though today we would have paskin, that this Daryavish has a din of a Yid, because his mother was Esther Amalka, according to most historians, Jewish historians, rabbinic historians, nevertheless, then the accepted was that you are Jewish only if both parents are Jewish. And even though he had a din of a non-Jew, but a non-Jew cannot have relations with the dog. The Gemara Elama'ata, that whenever Nach uses the words shego, how do you interpret Hadersif? Va'almora Shemaya Hisrei Mamt. This is Daniel speaking to King Belshazzar. This is still when the Babylonians were on top. And he was criticizing him, that you exalted yourself against Hashem. How did you do that, King Belshazzar? Because the vessels of the holy temple that was captured when the first temple was destroyed, that was brought into Babel. These kings, every now and then, they would actually bring out those utensils, and they would they brought it in front of you, and you used it. And who used the temple, the kalim of the Beis Hamikdash? You. This is what Daniel is telling this Babylonian king. The Rav Revanach and all of your nobles, and Sheglasach, here again Shegel, and your consorts, Vulechenasach, and your concubines, Chamra Shasan, behind wine did you drink in them? Now, if the Shegel means Kalbasahi, if Shegel means a dog, Kalbasah Bas Mishtaya Chamrahi, does a dog drink wine in a cup from a keli. So the Gemara says, no. That's not a kasha. Holy kasha, the last narrow line. Yeah, it was a dog. Could be there also shaglasah, or shaglasach means the dogs that they somehow they elevated to a status of a wife, and they trained them. The malchus lavashasya, that you can train a dog and it can behave in this area like a person by drinking wine in a cup. Elamata, another problem. When it says, and these are psukim that are foretelling the greatness that will be bestowed upon the Jewish people in the future, that benois melachim bikroisecha, the daughters of kings, will honor you. Mitzvah shegel yiminecha, the shegel will be sitting on your right. Bikesem oifir, in gold from oifir. Now the shegel kalbasa, shegel means a female dog. Makom of asul and never Yisrael. God forbid, what is then in the future we are going to be sitting with a shegel to our right. So the Gemara says, Hachi ka'amar, b'schar shechaviva toidel Yisrael k'shegel lo'evdek yechavim. As it became certain times in history, this illness of people becoming, they mamish like married their dogs. So it's like a metaphor that just like the Jewish people opted in making Torah beloved to them, the way other nations made their dogs beloved to them, because of that, zechisam lekesam oifer, you'll never to have up as golden garments or golden jewelry. Okay. So still, we just are insisting that shegel can mean a kalbasa. The iboy seimon, lo'olam shegel malkasei. No, shegel means a queen. The Rabba Bar Lema that said that this king at that time was sitting with a dog is sitting in the throne of the queen. Gemara Gamerlo, he had such a tradition that the queen by him was his dog. And Va'amai Karola Shegel. Now, shegel means a consort or a queen. Why are we calling the dog a shegel? Because he loved it the way a person would love his queen. Or inami shehoishiva b'makom shegel, because this person had the craziness of putting the dog the way another king would put his queen next to him. For him, he put a shegel next to him, and that's why we use this expression. And now the final proof that Yavesh soured became a non-righteous person. When here again, he is supplying the maintenance of the holy temple, and at kesef kikrin meya. So he told Ezra about the quantities that may be given to the temple upkeep. He says up to 100 talents of silver. Va'at chintin koren meya, and up to 100 kor of wheat. Va'at chamar batin meya. Batin is a certain measurement. Bath is 3 sa'ah, that you can give up to 100 baths of wine. Va'ad batin meshach meya, another 100 baths of oil. Umalach di like salt with no limit. In other words, he was giving a lot, but he put a limit to everything other than to salt. So Me'ikara, at first, when he began to give money to the holy temple, he did not set a limit. Hashta, now he's setting a limit. Aha, hechmetz, he's souring. So the Gemara says, no, that's no proof at all. The Dilma maybe Me'ikara in the beginning of the Second Temple era, he did not know how much the temple needs. So he never put a limit. Many years into it, he knew, he averaged how much they need, and he didn't want for people to take advantage from the federal reserves. So he gave a limit because he knew this is what they need. It doesn't prove that he soured, and therefore Ela Machaverta, the wider answer is Kiddushan Meikara, using all the ones above. Bottom line is that even though Malchei Umas Ha'olam, their Malchus is counted by Echad B'Tishrei, if and when there is a king that's not Jewish, but we considered him to be righteous, we honored him by counting his reign from Echad B'Nisan, and there could be a king, like it was with Dayavesh, that he went through phases. There was a time that he was more righteous, and then there was a time that he became less righteous, and therefore we changed the count of his kingship accordingly. Givaldik. And with this we end the Sugya, and now we're going back to the Mishnah. First day of Nisan marks the Rosh Hashana, V'lo Regolim, for the Jewish holidays. Now, just to know, literally, regel means a leg. We are supposed to go to the Holy Temple by foot. Even people that would travel on horse and buggy all the way to the mountains around Yerushalayim, they would walk up, they would walk to the Holy Land. And therefore, the stories of a chassid from the Alter Rebbe, he only went to the Rebbe by foot. He would never travel to the Alter Rebbe going on a horse and buggy, because it's similar, the mitzvah of going to the Holy Temple and going to be together with one's Rebbe over Yom Tov. Noch in his elder years, when he was unable to walk, he'd stopped going. So they told him, if you can't walk anymore, why didn't you at least go on the horse and buggy? So he says, when I'm going to come to the next world, they're going to want to reward me for going to visit my Rebbe. If I'm going with a horse, I don't want me and my horse to be rewarded together. Anyway, so L'Regalim, the Regalim refers to Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. Now, the Torah says in Parshas Kisitze, and we're going to learn a lot about this verse, this daf and the next daf. The pasuk says that Kisidor neder l'Hashem Elokecha. When you make a vow, we will see soon, it's not only regarding sacrifices that you opted in by making a vow. It's going to cover many types of obligations that a Jew might have for the Holy Temple. The Torah says, Lo yisa'acher l'shalmoi. Do not delay in paying your vow. The Torah says the words loy. We're going to use the words bal. It means the same thing, bal ta'achar. When do you violate bal ta'achar? As we will see, according to one of the 5 opinions, only after 3 holidays go by after your vow, but the 3 holidays have to be counted with Pesach being the first. In other words, if a person made a vow after Pesach to offer a carbon shlamim, you know how many Yomim Tovim they will have until they'll violate? They're going to have 5 Yomim Tovim. Shavuos, Sukkos, Pesach has to be the first. Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. And that's the meaning that on the Echad ben Nisan is the Rosh Hashana, L'Regalim. When will you violate Bal Ta'achar? Not only when 3 holidays go by and you didn't pay your pledges. No, when 3 holidays go by, Pesach being the first. But here's the problem. If we are focusing on the holidays, Pesach is not on the first day of Nisan. Pesach is on the 15th of Nisan. So, fragt die Gemara, Regalim, be'echad ben Nisanu. That's bechamisha aser ben Nisan. Pesach is on the 15th of Nisan. Who answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Chizda, Regel, Sheboy, Rosh Hashana, L'Regalim. And let me word this the way we began the Masechta, according to the way Hasidus explains the power of Rosh Hashana. Rosh Hashana doesn't mean the beginning of the year. Rosh Hashana means the head of the year. Everything in the year is included in the head of the year. So Echad ben Nisan is Rosh Hashana. In Echad ben Nisan, you have the 15th of Nisan, because everything that will happen in the month is in the head of the month. That's the pshat. No, it's Echad ben Nisan. Rosh Hashana is Echad ben Nisan, or Echad b'Tishrei, or Echad b'Elul, or Echad b'Shvat, or Tu b'Shvat. These are the Rosh Hashanas. Just because the Yom Tov B'Poyel manifests in the 15th, it's included be'echad b'Nisan. It's be'echad b'Nisan Rosh Hashana L'Regalim. Now, nafkami, no. Okay, so what does it mean? What's the halachic implication? L'noider, if a person makes a vow, when will you violate Bal Ta'achar? As we will see, this is exclusively the opinion of Rabbi Shimon by having 3 Yomim Tovim go by and Pesach being the first. And now the Tanya. We learned in Abraisa, Echad HaNoider, the word Noider here means if a person says, I pledge to give my value, Dami Olai, my value I will give to the Holy Temple, or your value, Damim. What does that mean, Damim? In those days, there were slave markets, and the way we assessed how much a person is worth, even though a person has infinite value, but the way we would give a person some sort of financial value is by saying how much is that person worth in a slave market. And a person sometimes felt that their life was saved because of God, or they want to give all of themselves to God. So the way they express it is by saying, I'm giving all of my value to God. They made such a pledge. That's damim, or dami, or your value, his value, or her value. Or magdish, if a person specifies to an item, this item I'm consecrating to God. Or if a person makes a pledge by using the words erech, Hama'arech. Now, this is a parsha that we'll learn a whole masechtas about it. If you use the word assessment, then the Torah gives, depending on your age and gender, a specified amount, regardless how much you are worth in a slave market. But these are different types of pledges that people can make. So if a person makes a pledge, first of all, pay it as soon as possible. And that's especially true, as we will see in the sugya, that anyways, a man is obligated to go to the Holy Temple 3 times a year, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. So there is a positive commandment to pay down this pledge the first time you go there. L'kula alma. And if you didn't pay it down during the first holiday after your pledge, you violated the positive commandment. We want to know, when will this person violate the negative commandment of thou shalt not delay? Bal ta'achar. We'll use from now on the words bal ta'achar. So kiv and sha'avru olav gimel regalim. According to the first version, according to the first Tana, the Tanach holds, sequence is irrelevant. No matter when you made the vow. After 3 Yamim Tovim go by, we're speaking only again about Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, then you violate Bal Ta'achar. But according to the Tanakh, obviously that's not the author of the Mishnah. Has nothing to do with Pesach. If a person were to make the vow right now, now we're in Mar Cheshvan, then the first holiday will be Pesach. But if a person makes the vow, let's say right before Tishrei, then they'll violate it after Shavuos, because then Sukkot went by, and Pesach went by, and Shavuos went by. Rab Shimon Omer, Gimel Regalim, but it has to be Kisidron. There has to be a sequence, and which one needs to be the first for you to say the third already went by and you didn't pay up. Now you're violating. And that is our Mishnah. And Rab Shimon ben Yochai Omer, and just to give everyone a rule, that whenever you learn about Rabbi Shimon, as a klal, stam, Rab Shimon is Rab Shimon ben Yochai. It's the same one, who says that regarding our Mishnah's rule, that you violate Bal Ta'achar when holidays go by, Pa'amim Gimel, Pa'amim Dalet, Pa'amim Chamisha. Sometimes you're going to violate after 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 5. Ketzad, not a lifnei Pesach. If your vow was made before Pesach, I don't care if it's Isru Chag Sukkos or if it's Yud Daled Nisan. If you make your vow before Pesach, then indeed you will violate Bal Ta'achar by 3 Yomim Tov, because Pesach is the first that went by without you paying up. If a person made his vow before Shavuos, then he's only going to violate Bal Ta'achar after 5 Yomim Tov go by, because it's going to be Shavuos, it's going to be Sukkos. You're not even counting down yet. Then Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. And if a person made the vow before Chag, meaning before Sukkos, then the violation will happen after 4 Yomim Tovim. Okay. In other words, our Mishnah follows Reb Shimon, and now second line before the bottom of the Amid, we're going to quote a lengthy brisa. It's important to remember it also for Daf Hey. The brisa is going to give all the different vows, all of them, for which if you lingered by not paying it up, at a certain point, you're going to violate Bal Ta'achar. So first of all, this last brisa on the Amid is going to give many other types of vows. And also it's here that we will have all of the 5 opinions amongst the Tanoim, exactly when are you going to violate Bal Ta'achar. So Tana Rabbanan, Chayove Hadamim, we already explained. When a person says, my damim, my value, using the words damim, I'm gonna give to the temple, or your damim, or my child's damim, or whatever. Ve'ha'erchin is when you use the word erech, which means in English assessment, but that's a key word. And this word is of tremendous significance, because when a person pledges by giving the erech, it doesn't matter how much you are worth in the slave market. God prescribes for every person, and depending on his or her gender, depending on his or her age, a specified amount. Hacharamim is if a person uses the words chedem when they are making a pledge. Now, there are some details about the word chedem. I know that sometimes chedem means excommunicating someone. It does not mean it over here. Chedem means that this item is no longer mine. It's chedem from me because I'm giving it to. Now, people also use the word chedem when they are making a pledge to give something to kohanim. And there's a machloikis that we'll have elsewhere, whether stam chedem lekohanim or stam chedem is lebedek habayis. Here we're speaking about the pledge to the bedek habayis. It's all about pledging money for the temple. Only in that context is there a violation of Bal Ta'achar. Or well, let's add, if you have a specific thing upon which you say, this I'm being magdish to God. Last line. Or if a person is obligated to chatos. In other words, it's not a pledge. They violated something for which they're chayiv to bring a chatos. Bring it, of course, as soon as possible. And again, when the first Yom Tov comes, you should definitely bring it. And if you don't, you're going to be violating the positive commandment. But when do you violate the negative commandment? So that's the topic. Chatois, or you violated another sin for which you chayiv a carbon called a carbon asham, or oila, or a shlamim, or tzedakos. Now, tzedakos means charitable pledges. Charitable pledges, as we will, God willing, learn on Daf Vav, is not so simple. Because charitable pledges, the person violates much quicker, much before as we'll see, the different opinions, Bal Ta'achar. So we're gonna just say that we're gonna have to deal with this word tzedakahs. Maisros refers Rashi and Tosfos to Meiser Rishon, to Meiser Sheni, to Meiser Ani. Now hold on. Before we go on, for people that are familiar with Chitas and Parshas Kisavoy, the mitzvah of biur maisros, we know that when is a person obligated to finally give their maisros to their respective recipients? So there's a deadline. The deadline is before Pesach or before Achron Shel Pesach. We'll leave that for another time. On the 4th year, to give of all of the maisros that was separated from the beginning of the 7-year cycle until then, and before Pesach of the 7th year. And that could mean that many more than 3 Yom Tovim went by before a person is in violation. So Tosfos in the last Tosfos in the Amid addresses it. Maisros means going Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni, Meiser Ani. Uma shekava aleim hakosav zman biur. That which we find that there is a time where you have to get rid of it. As it says, he's quoting from Re'eh, Miksei Sholish Shanim Toitzi. And we know that Meiser Sheni, the deadline is Erev Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach. The Erev, the first day of Yom Tov of the 4th year. And Erev Yom Tov of Pesach on the 7th year. That's the time when you have to get rid of it. That explains Tosfos means that if you grew produce and it's still tevel, you're not touching it. You're not violating anything. So there's a deadline. There was these 2 times in the 7-year cycle. Now you have to separate the maisros. Obviously, Tosfos says you only mechoyev if the produce is completed, as we learned so much at the end of the last Masechta. But the first wide line, once a person already separated Meiser Rishon or Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani, then they don't have all the way until Erev Chag HaPesach of the 4th year or of the 7th year to give it. No, then they are chayiv to give it way earlier, and if they don't, they're going to be violating Bal Ta'achad, as we'll see in a moment. That's a very important Tosfos to know. Back inside the Gemara, with the last line, Bechar. Bechar means when you have an animal that's born to you from domesticated animals. If the firstborn animal, the first emission or omission of the womb of the mother is a male animal, you have to give it to a kohen. The big question is this Braisa speaking about my obligation to give it to the kohen, or are we speaking about the kohen's obligation when the animal is not blemished to offer it as a carbon? But in one of these two, if there is too much time that went by without this being done, there's going to be a violation of, you delayed, Bal Ta'achar. Meiser means Meiser Behema. We just said Meiser before. Meiser Behema, as we just explained in the beginning of the Masechta, that all of the animals that are born into my domesticated herd this year, whether it's Echad Be'elul, whether it's Echad B'Tishrei, I gather, and every 10th one is holy to God. So here also there is a point where either you have to tithe it or you have to offer it, and if not, you're going to be violating. You lingered, you delayed. Pesach, of course, is a problem. Pesach Bal Ta'achar. What do you mean? If you don't bring Pesach on the 14th, you violated Bal Ta'achar because you can't bring it later. The Gemara is going to speak about that. We're going to have to come back to this Braisa and explain many of the cases mentioned, but let's go together and carbon Pesach. Dalid on the base, leket means that when a person is gleaning ears of grain, there are times that from the hand of the reaper, a small amount of individual ears fall down. We have to leave it to the poor. Shichacha means that when a person is gathering sheaves, if you are going systematically down the rows in your field and you went over, you forgot to gather a limited amount of sheaves, 1 or 2 sheaves, you have to leave it for the poor. Peah means that you have to leave an edge of your field, however the Torah determines a field, for the poor. Now really, these are items that have to be left for the poor. You're not giving it to the poor. But Tosfos says, if a person erroneously, b'mezid, b'shoigig, gathered it, I should have left the sheaves for the poor, but I didn't. I gathered it. Now I have to give it to the poor. Now it's in my possession. But I can't say, I made a mistake, it's mine, I have to give it to the poor. So there's a certain point after which, if you didn't give it to the poor, you violated Bal Ta'achar. Kivin, on all of the above. The Tanach holds, doesn't matter sequence. Kivin she'avru aleim from when the pledge was made, from when you erroneously gathered the leket, once then you are violating Baal Ta'achar. Opinion number one, Tanakama. It's not sequence, it's three. Opinion number two, which as we know is the Stam, our Mishnah. Rab Shimon Omer, I agree that there has to be dafka 3 holidays going over for you to violate Baal Ta'achar, but it has to be Kesidran. There is a sequence to it, and which one has to be the first of the 3? Chag HaMatzah is Tchil. Opinion number 3 is Rabbi Meir. He disagrees with 3. Rabbi Meir links the negative commandment to the positive commandment. Rabbi Meir says, Kivin she'avar aleim, even only regel echad, already you are also violating Baal Ta'achar, thou shalt not delay. Opinion number 4, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Kivin she'avru aleim shnei regolim oiver b'Baal Ta'achar. First of all, there is no sequence, but unlike Rabbi Meir that links it to one Yom Tov, it's 2 Yomim Tovim. Again, it doesn't matter whether you made the pledge out of Yom Tov, whether you made it Matzeh Sukkos, that's the biggest gap, and it's a Iber Yar. Doesn't make a difference. You're going to violate either according to Rav Meir when Pesach finished and you didn't fulfill your pledge, or according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov when Shavuos is over. By the way, it's when the Yom Tov is over. And the fifth and the final opinion, Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon Omer, it's not about 1, it's not about 2, it's not about 3, it's dafka about Sukkos. Which means if a person made a pledge before Pesach, in this case, 3 Yomim Tovim will have to go by. But we're not counting down. It's Sukkos, dafka. When the entire Sukkos went over and you didn't fulfill any of the above obligations, then you violated Baal Ta'achar. Don't delay fulfilling your pledge. End of Braisa. First, here on this Amid, we're going to go and look for the sources of all of these 5 opinions. And then on next daf, we're going to come back, as we already mentioned, some of the cases that the Braisa gave will need further elaboration. Beginning with the Tanakama, fragting Gemara, my Tama the Tanakama, that it has to be 3, but we don't hear about the sequence. Now, not just for clarity, the verse that records God's negative mitzvah, Lo Yisa'acher L'Shalmoi, is a pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze. What we're going to be using now, this is Torah Shebal Peh, we're going to a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh. That's not speaking about Baal Ta'achar. There's no mention of don't delay to bring the korbanos. That pasuk is telling us, first, we read this on Yom Tov. The Torah goes through all of the 3 Yomim Tovim, beginning with Pesach, and many laws about each one, concluding with the laws of Sukkos and the mitzvahs connected to Sukkos, the gathering of the Daled Minim, the mitzvah of sitting and dwelling in a sukkah. And then after the Torah speaks about the specifics, the Torah writes like this: Sholosh pa'amim bashana, yeroa kol zchurchas penei Hashem aleikecha. If the Torah would not have said which 3 Yomim Tovim, we would have understood which 3, because the Torah just listed all of the 3. The Torah could have just said, Sholish pa'amim bashana yeroa kol zchurchas penei Hashem aleikecha. But God then adds b'chag hamatzos u'b'chag hashavuos u'b'chag hasukos. All 3 is completely superfluous. And then the Torah says, V'lo yeroa es penei Hashem reikom. A person should not go and see God's face empty-handed. The pshat, just to know, the pshat of that pasuk, not to come empty-handed, means that when you come for Yom Tov, you have to bring what we call a oilas re'iyah. A carbon oila, a carbon that's fully burnt. It's called the carbon of being seen, of seeing and being seen by God. That's the pshat. But now we're going to learn the drush. Not only al pi drush is this pasuk referring to the mitzvah of bringing the carbon oilas re'iyah. Really, the Torah is saying that when you come from these 3 Yomim Tovim, make sure you bring with you any and all of the other pledges, obligations that you have to give to God. Now, Michti Minayu Salik, the Torah already went through the details of the rules of Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkos. So, why did the Torah have to write the words Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos? These words are extra. If the Torah would not have written anything, if the Torah only would have written Shalish Pa'am Bashana Yirakos Churcha, Espenei Hashem Aleikecha, V'lo Yiroi Panai Reikom, I would have known which 3. So from this, Shmami no Baal Ta'achar. That's it. So that's already a hint. Aside of the mitzvah of bringing Oilas Re'iyam, when 3 Yomim Tovim go by and you didn't bring the other pledges, that is when you'll violate the negative commandment that's recorded in the Parshas Kiseitze. And it's not about the sequence. Yeah, of course, the Torah happens to mention Chag HaMatzos first, but it's any three. That's the Tanakama. Rab Shimon holds. Rab Shimon disagrees with the Tanakama. Now, when the Torah there in the A goes through the three Yom Tovim, the first one being Pesach, the second one being Shavuos, the third and the last one being Sukkos, Rab Shimon holds that even if the Torah decides to repeat the words, the Torah could have says that Shalosh Pa'am Bashana Kol Zechur Chaspnei Hashem Aleikecha. The Torah could have said U Bechag Hamatzos, U Bechag Hashavuos. All three are extra. But even if God wants to repeat these names of the holidays to hint, to give a remes of the love of Balta Achar, even now there's like another question. Don't say Chag HaSukkos. Meila Chag Pesach or Chag HaMatzos, Meila Chag HaShavuos is in that parsha, but not immediately prior to this verse. Sukkos is the last Yom Tov mentioned, and we conclude right before the pasuk Shalish Pa'am Bashanam. You are speaking about Sukkos, so it's like a double question. Don't, if you want to add, don't add Sukkos. Means even if you want to repeat these names to hint to the Isur of Balta Achar, you could have done it without mentioning Sukkos. Why is Sukkos even more problematic? Because Shaboy Diber HaKosav, because this follows immediately the explanation of Sukkos. And Lama Nemar, not only did God repeat the names, but it also repeated Sukkos to tell you, no, it has to be in the sequence. Chag HaMatzos is the first one, then Shavuos, and then Sukkos. Shezeh Achroin. Ubemel, if a person made a pledge in between Pesach and Shavuos, like we learned in Amud Aleph, according to Rab Shimon, you're going to violate Balta Achar after 5 Yom Tovim go by. Shavuos went by, Sukkos went by, but Chag HaMatzos wasn't the first one. Chag HaSukkos is the last of the three. Okay. Similar, but this added, even repeating, you don't have to write Chag HaSukkos. The third sheet in the Braisa was Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says there's no three, no sequence, one. Why? My Tamu. Oh, so he's Gavaldik. So earlier in Parshas Re'eh, earlier in Devarim, Perek, Yud, Beis, Psukim 5 and 6. Pasuk 5 ends with the words Ubasa Shama. Pasuk 6 begins with the words Vahavesam Shama. Come there and bring there. This is the source of the positive commandment, that whenever you come to the Holy Temple, bring with you your pledges. And that Perek is speaking about the three Yom Tovim. In other words, since Lokula Alma, you violate the positive commandment of when you go there, bring your pledge. Ubasa Shama Vahavesam Shama. You're going to be violating the mitzvah saseh, says Rav Meir. So it makes sense. And if you didn't bring it, not only did you violate the positive commandment, you violated the negative commandment that's written in Parshas Kiseitze of Loisa Acher L'Shalmai or Balta Acher. V'Rabbanan meaning both the Tanakama and Rab Shimon, they are moida, they agree that the juxtaposition of the words Ubasa Shama followed by next verse that begins with the words Vahavesam Shama is taka telling you that there is a positive commandment that you violate, even only after one Yom Tiv. But that's only for the positive commandment. So what? The negative commandment doesn't have to travel on the same track. How only la'aseh? And Rav Meir holds, kiven the amalei rachmana aiseh, v'lo yaiseh. If God is telling you to bring it as a positive commandment, it makes sense that you should therefore also be violating the negative commandment. Memela koim le bebalta ach. Okay. Shita number 4. Tana number 4.
Can you just explain how that works? So I violate the assay by not bringing it the first Yom Tov, but the next Yom Tov I bring it, so then I get my assay. So it's to like cancel out. Like how does that work?
Let me word it like this. Let me just point out what Danny is saying in different words, and we're not going to address this right now. Just to bring up the question. Normally, the difference between a positive commandment and a negative commandment is, in consequence, is that for a violation of a positive commandment there isn't a penalty. Sometimes you have to bring a carbon oil. But let's say flogging. Normally, for the violation of a negative commandment, we consider a violation of a negative something more severe, more serious, and the consequence is you're going to get malchus. However, we also know as a rule that any lav shenitak la'asei, you don't get malchus for. So if a person steals, God says thou shalt not steal, but after a person, God forbid, stole, they're not going to get flogged because the Torah tells them give back the money. As we will see, even when a person violated Bal Ta'achar, even if there was a specific animal that's already consecrated, the animal does not become invalid. The animal must be brought. And therefore, the person will not get malchus as long as there is the option of bringing that animal. So I would word it like this. The positive commandment, you violate after the first Yom Tov, L'Kula Alma, but you're not going to get malchus. After 3 Yomim Tovim, you're violating a negative commandment, but don't say, and therefore you'll get malchus, lav dafka, as long as you are able to bring it still, you won't violate the negative. But if something happens and you are unable to bring the animal, then you'll be chayiv malchus only after the Tanakama, 3 Yomim Tovim, L'Rab Shimon, 3 Chag HaSukkos at the last, and according to Rabbi Meir, even only after 1 Yom. Okay, Danny? Or as we have in the beginning of Igeres HaTshuva regarding the different types of tshuva that is needed. So for a mitzvah saseh, just tshuva is enough. For a lav, tshuva is not enough. Tshuva and Yom Kippur.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, when you think of, let's say, a mitzvah asay, like if you didn't put on tefillin, you violated an asay or whatever, right? But if you're supposed to give a korban, I didn't give it now, but I gave it the next holiday. I didn't violate it. I just delayed it.
You violated that asay, and then you fixed it. It's different. It's a tshuva. In other words, it's not like I missed Shema. It's not mu'uves asher lo yuchal liskoin. Because my Shema of today is not the Shema of yesterday. Just because I say Shema today, if God forbid I missed yesterday, I missed. Here, I know it's not the same. But that's why I mentioned that I'm telling you that even when you're over the lav, it's a lav that's considered that you can make up for. You could make it up. So even though a person violated the lav, they're not going to always get malchus that quick. Okay, let's go right. Now, what's the fourth shita? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds, again, 2 Yomim Tovim, my tamam. It's amazing how they have these limud. So says the Gemara, the Chsiv, it says, and these are psukim at the end of Pinchas, after the Torah records all of the karbanos musaf. So the Torah says, Eileh, these tasu lashem b'mayadechem, these karbanos musafs you should make, meaning you should bring to God during your holidays. And then the Torah adds the words, levad minidrechem, aside of you bringing your pledged karbanos. Levad minidrechem, and Eila Tasel Hashem bim moyadechem lashanabe. Miut moyadim. Whenever you speak in the plural form, the minimum of plural is 2. And the Torah links. The Gemara is not writing it, but right after it says the words Eila Tasel Hashem moyadechem, it says levad minidrechem. Remez that when you violated Bal Ta'achar for not bringing your neder, when moyadechem go by. Now again, v'Rabbanan. This Rabbanan will go to all 3, Tanakama, Rab Shimon, and of Meir. What do they learn from the word moyadechem? They learn something else. The Omar Rabbi Yoina, the fact that the Torah writes the words bim moyadechem, we will not focus on the plural expression, but we will focus on the fact that we are joining together all of the moyadim that's mentioned in Pinchas, which includes Rosh Chodesh and all the others, Rosh Hashana, Yom Kippur, and the 3 Moyadim. Now, we are linking them together to teach you that Kol Moyadim Kulam Shavim Zelozeh Shekulam Achaprem Al Tumas Mikdashu Kadashov. So to be brief, Chavre, we will learn this extensively, God willing, when we learn the beginning of Masechta Shavuos. But appreciate the following, that during every Musaf set of Karbanos, there is the Higot Lachatas, the Soyer Lachatas. If we daven, even davening, learning Chitas, you'll remember Soyer Lachatas. What does that Chatas atone for? So it's very interesting. It's similar, but not the same. Dafke on Rosh Chodesh, do we have a learning that if a person ate kachim, when the meat of kachim was tamei, one should not have done so. If that was done, it is for this that the he-goat that's brought on Rosh Chodesh brings atonement for. That's, again, when a person ate consecrated meat, when the meat was tamei. Now, when it comes to the he-goat of all the other Yomim Tovim, it brings an atonement for something similar, but not the same. There, the atonement is not if the meat is tamei. What happens if the meat was tahor, but the person was tamei? They ate, a tamei person ate meat that's tahor. Or if a tamei person entered an area in the temple that he or she was not allowed to enter. That's another type of sin. For that, we know that the seidim, the he-goats that are brought on all the other Yom Tovim, they bring atonement for that. Without the words moy adechem that combines them together, I would think dafka. The side of Rosh Chodesh only brings atonement for the mistake of eating meat when you are tahar, but the meat was tamei. The seidim of all the other Yom Tovim, that is lachatas in Musaf, brings about atonement for when the person is tamei, the person is tamei, and the food is start, the place is start. So the Torah says the words here, Eila Tasla Shem Amayadechem, to tell you, Shekula Mechaprim Al Tumas Mikdash Ukadasha. They all bring atonement for everything. Every side that's brought on Rosh Chodesh, on Rosh Hashana, on Yom Kippur, both atonement for the mistake of eating kachim when the meat was tamei, and for the person who was tamei that ate kachim that start. For a person who's tamei that entered an area that he should not have entered. Now the final one, my tama, that he says what? What is his shita? What's the fifth shita? It's only about sukkos. It's only about sukkos. So he begins using the same logic of his father, which is that even though the Torah, you didn't have to repeat Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, or Chag HaSukkos. But even if you want to repeat it, the one that's not needed is Chag HaSukkos, because you just spoke about sukkos. The Torah could have said, "U bechag hamatzos," "u" with the vav, "u bechag hashavuos." Notes his question was just like his father's. His conclusion is different. His father, Rab Shimon, concluded to tell you that Sukkos is the last. So it's three in sequence. Sukkos is the last. He holds no three. It's only about Sukkos. If you made your pledge before Sukkos, you violate after one Yom. If you made your pledge before Shavuos, you violated 2 Yom Tovim. It's all about Sukkos. Okay. Now, the fact that they don't learn anything from the Torah's apparent superfluous repetition of the words in the A, Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos, Hai b'Chag HaMatzos, what do they learn from it? So the Gemara answers, they use it as was taught by Rabbi Elazar. Like we spoke on in the introduction, Tashlumen means compensation. Now, I want you to know that we're going to learn this in the beginning of Chagiga, Daf Ches, Daf Tes. The sources from where we learn that even though you were supposed to bring it on the first day of Yom Tov, you can compensate for a total week. That means that day plus 6 days. That is really psukim that we find connected to the Korban Chagiga. So whenever you're going to learn in Chazal about the Chagiga, it really also means the Oilas Re'iyah. It's the two types of sacrifices that you ideally should bring on the first day, even though we learned in Beitza, if it's Shabbos, Lav Dafka, you can bring it. But normally, theoretically, you bring Korbanos on the first day, Oilas Re'iyah and Shalmei Chagiga. And if you didn't bring it the first day, you can compensate for it. Now, don't forget that on Pesach, when you are compensating for it, you're doing it on the holiday because the holiday is a 7-day holiday. When you compensated on Sukkot, you're doing it on the holiday. Shavuos only has 1 day. So one would have thought that there isn't an option of compensation when it comes to Atzeres, but there is. So Kol Shiva means 1 plus 6. Bring it on the 6th of Sivan. But if you didn't bring it for the next 6 days, Talmud Limit is learned from here. The Torah puts together Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, and Chag HaSukkos. By putting these three together, we are comparing Chag HaShavuos to which one? The Chag HaMatzos. The Chag HaMatzos. My friends, the Pasuk puts together 3 holidays. Why don't we say compare Chag HaShavuos to Chag HaSukkos, and there'll be a different outcome? The Gemara is going to ask that in a moment. But compared to Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaMatzos, Yesh Lo Tashlumin. Kol Shiva during all of the 7 days of Pesach, which means that even if you didn't bring it on the first day, you have another 6 days. Av Chag HaShavuos, today it's always on the 6th of Sivan. If you did not bring the Oilas Re'iyah, if you did not bring the Shalmei Chagiga on the first day as you should have, Yesh Lo Tashlumin Kol Shiva, you can compensate it for a total of, including the 6th of Sivan, a total of 7 days. Nice, I got it. So it's written to teach you the Hekesh. But why are we comparing it to Matzos? Why don't we compare it to Sukkos? And you'll see it will make a difference. Because we're going to prove that on Sukkos, the din of compensation isn't 1/6, it's 1 and 7, a total of 8 days. Even on Shmini Atzeres, one can still compensate for the Oilas Re'iyah they should have brought on the first day of Sukkos. So why do you compare it and add another day of potential compensation? Malahaloin, just like over there by Sukkos, you can bring the oilas re'iyah and the shalmei chagiga as compensation. It's not lechatchila, but b'di'evet for a total of 8 days. Say by Shavuos you have a total of 8 days. Today that would mean there will be yet another day without Tachnun. Even Yud Gimel there will be no Tachnun. So the Gemara says, no. Shmini regel b'fnei atzmayu. Who says you can bring the compensation of the oilas re'iyah, shalmi chagiga, on Shmini Atzeres? Shmini Atzeres is a separate yontiv. You can't bring it on Shmini Atzeres. Counters the Gemara, it's not true. In true, for some dinim we consider Shmini Atzeres a yontiv for itself. That's only regarding the 6 rules of Pizar Kishav. And Ashi Chazers, what we had in Yuma and what we had in Sukkah. Pay stands for the lottery. In other words, there was the being that there were so many karbanis that were brought during the 7 days of Sukkot. We did not make lotteries to see which mishmar should be zoiche in bringing it, but they all brought it, and there was a rotation system. And it ended up at the end that aside of 2 of the 24 mishmaros, they brought over the Yom Tov 3 bulls. Only 2 mishmaros brought 2 bulls. So you would think that on Shmini Atzeres that there is 1 bull to bring. It should be divided only amongst the final 2. We don't do that. Everyone goes into the lottery. The Zion means that you make Zman Shechiyonu. We say a Shechiyonu on Shmini Atzeres. The Reish, Rashi holds, Regel B'fnei Atzmi means that you don't say Chag HaSukkos Hazeh. You have another name to the holiday. Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh. The Kuf stands for Karbanos. In other words, it doesn't follow the sequence of Karbanos. It's not 13, 12, 11, and then the last day of Sukkot is 7. It's not 6, it's 1. It's a different sequence. Shin means that the song, the content, the lyrics of the shiur of the Levium is not similar to whatever they were singing during Sukkot. And the Beis, according to Rashi, is a special bracha that they would give the king on the day of Yom Tov. On Shvi Shal Pesach, they wouldn't give a new bracha to the king, but on Shmini Atzeres they did. So true regarding these 6 laws, Shmini Atzeres is considered a Yom Tov for itself. Abali and Tashlumim. Divrei Yaakov Tashlumim Derishonu. No, you could bring it on you could bring the Tashlumim on the Shmini Atzeres, the first white line, as it says clearly in the Mishnah, that Mishlei Chag, Karban Chagiga, also Oilas Re'iyah. But Mishlei Chag Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag, if you didn't bring it on the first day, Chagig as Kol HaRegel, meaning the Yom Tov Ha'achron Shel Chag, Shmini Atzeres included. So why are we comparing Shavuos to Pesach to Chag HaMatzos? Compare it to the Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres of Sukkos. Answers the Gemara. This is the cloud. Whenever you have 2 options, Tofasta Meruba Loy Tofasta. If you try to seize the larger amount, you might end up with nothing. Tofasta Muat, yes, Tofasta. So therefore, you compare it Dafke to Chag HaMatzos. We'll stop over here. God willing, to be continued. We're good. Someone wants to put up a 4-minute break, I don't mind. But this is the sugya of Bal Ta'achir. And by the way, we're not done yet. In other words, a big part of Daf Hey is going to continue, the whole Daf Hey is going to continue elaborating the Braisa we had on Daf Daled in the bottom.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Chevra, let's go. It says 7:04 on my clock over here. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Rosh Hashana Daf Hey. We left off on Daf Daled on the days, the last line from the Amid. Quickly recapping, we began a Braisa on Daf Daled towards the bottom, second to last line. The Braisa spoke about many different types of obligations, pledges that a person is obligated to bring to the Holy Temple. On all of them, the question is, how many Yom Tovim need to pass for a person who should have brought it as soon as possible? Certainly should have brought it when anyways you went to the Beis HaMikdash during Yom Tov, during the first Yom Tov after your pledge or after your obligation. But if you didn't bring it then, so there's five different opinions amongst the Tanoim. When will you violate? Another violation of Lo Yisa'achar l'shalmoi, don't delay bringing it. What does delaying mean? different types of delaying. Now, in this context, when we are going back and forth with the sources of the various Tanoim, where we left off is that in Parshas Re'eh, when the Torah is Bechlal explaining the dinim of all of the three Yomim Tovim. So the Torah specifies the rules of Chag HaMatzos, and then Chag HaShavuos, and then Chag HaSukkos. The Torah then says that Sholosh Pa'amim Hashanah, during these 3 times a year, Yeirah Kol Zechur Chas Pnei Hashem Alekecha. The Torah Bechlal did not have to say the words Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos. The Torah said all these 3 words, either to tell you that only when 3 go by do you violate Bal Ta'achad, or the Torah is telling you that the 3 that go by have to be on the sequence. Chag HaMatzos has to be the first. However, other Tanoim did not subscribe to this whole opinion, like we had in the last year, and we are in the middle of discussing what do they do with Hashem's, so to say, superfluous Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, and Chag HaSukkos. And we learned from over there, that's where we left off in last year, that even though Shavuos is only a 1-day holiday, one might have thought that if a person did not bring his obligation korbanos, which is oila, a carbon oila known as oilas re'iyah, and a shlamim carbon known as shalmei chagiga, a person has to bring it on the first day of Yom Tov. And if a person didn't, did you lose the mitzvah or can you compensate for it? So on Pesach, you can compensate it during the entire Pesach, which is a total of 7 days. Or if you didn't bring it on the first day, you have another 6 days. On Sukkot, as we left off, if you didn't bring it on the first day, you can actually compensate for another 7 days, a total of 8 days. Both of them have tashlumin. So the Torah wrote the words Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos to teach you that even though Shavuos is a 1-day Yom Tov, if you did not bring a carbon on Shavuos, these 2 karbanos, you can also compensate for it, but not like Sukkos. You don't have another 7 days, you only have another 6 days, because since there's 2 options to compare it to Matzos or to Sukkos, Tafasta Meruba, Loi Tafasta, Tafasta Meruba, Tafasta, and we're going to continue learning this sugya. We're going to learn, since we don't compare it to Sukkos, so the Torah should have only written Ubachaga Matzos, Ubachaga Shavuos, which is really the taina of Rab Shimon, if you remember what we learned in last year. So we're going to learn something else from the fact that Torah writes the words Chag HaSukkos. We're going to learn about the mitzvah of Lina. Lina means that when you come to the Beis Hamikdash for Yom Tov, you can't leave Motzoi Yom Tov. You have to stay overnight. Really, we're going to learn a Tosfos that says every time you brought a carbon to the Beis Hamikdash, you can't bring it and leave. You have to overnight in Yerushalayim. But theoretically, if a person would come to the Holy Temple and they wouldn't bring karbanos, simply by the fact that it's Yom Tov in itself demands for you to express your excitement of being there by not running away right afterwards. Lina, you should overnight. Now we're going to be speaking about the dual mitzvah, either 2 parts of the mitzvah of, or 2 separate mitzvahs regarding counting the days and the weeks leading up to Shavuos, how there is a mitzvah to both count the days and to count the weeks, which is exactly how we count the Omer. Today is so-and-so days, so-and-so weeks. We're going to speak a little bit about a very important Rabbeinu Yerucham, and based on that, the Shevet HaLevi and some other commentators regarding the mitzvah of counting the Omer. And basically the entire daf, or almost the entire daf, will be a daf out of Kachim. We're going to be learning how if a person who designated a carbon for a carbon Pesach and they didn't bring it, even though they violated Bal Ta'achad immediately, but that animal has to be brought, but it becomes a shlamim. We learned a lot about this in Masechtas Psachim. I think we learned again about it more in Masechtas Yuma. It's called a shlamim haba machmas Pesach. And what we're going to have a beautiful question, which will be that based on those opinions that say that you only violate Bal Ta'achad when 3 Yomim Tovim go by, a shlamim that was a Pesach, how do you count the 3 Yomim Tovim? Do you count it Pesach being the first? Or do you say, no, when it was Pesach, it was only a carbon Pesach. Now it became a shlamim, so now it's like a new carbon. So now Pesach is not one of the 3 that went over the carbon before you brought it. Verstehst? That will be a discussion. We're going to learn about B'chlal replacement karbanos. We're going to learn some dinim of a tmura. We're going to learn about a tmuras toida. And the unique halachas about the 40 loaves of bread can only come with the original toida. It does not come with a substitute toida. It doesn't come with a tmura toida. And finally, we're going to learn the halacha that even when someone violated balta achad, the person violated balta achad. But that animal still has to be brought. The animal does not become invalidated, and chevra much more. Again, daf dalid amid beis, we left off at the last line. Now that according to the opinions that use Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos is here to teach you the law that even by Shavuos you could compensate, but we learned the amount of time from Matzos. So why did the Torah have to write Chag HaSukkos? The Torah could have spoken about the 3 holidays, and then the Torah could have said Sholish Pa'amim Hashana Yirah Kol Zechurcha u'bechag HaMatzos u'bechag HaShavuos. We would have understood Chag HaSukkos because we just spoke about Chag HaSukkos. And we would have had the hekesh between Shavuos and Pesach and Matzos. So the Gemara says, no, because there is another din, la'akushe la'Chag HaMatzos, because we want to compare everything to Chag HaMatzos, everything meaning both Shavuos and Sukkos, what? Ma Chag HaMatzos ta'un lina, that when a person comes to the Beis HaMikdash, now, really, what happened there is that you bring the Korban Pesach on the 14th. On Yom Tov, you can definitely not leave because on Yom Tov, you have to bring an Oilas Re'iyah. On Yom Tov, you have to bring a Shalmei Chagiga. Nowadays, you can't leave because there's Tchumen, even if it's only Midrabanan. But the Torah tells you that, as we'll see in a moment, that you can only leave next morning. Next morning means the morning of Chol HaMoed, not the night going into Chol HaMoed. That's called the Mitzvah of Lina. Just like Chag HaMatzos is the source where the Torah reveals that when you come to Yom Tov, you have to overnight in Yerushalayim, Av Chag HaSukkos, Ta'un Lina, and really it also means Shavuos. So there's 2 dinim that we learn from the Hekesh, Tashlumin for Shavuos, and the din of Lina for both Shavuos and Sukkos. Now, V'hasa Minolan, how do you know that by Pesach you have to stay overnight, which means that a person cannot leave the night going into Chol HaMoed, to the first day Chol HaMoed? No, you got to wait until the morning because it says Ufanisa Baboiker v'holachta li'oy. And the word Baboiker, to make it clear, cannot mean the morning of the first day Yom Tov because you have to bring Karbanis Oilas Re'iyah and Shalmei Chagig. Now, the big Tosfos, the first Tosfos points out, like we spoke out in the introduction, that there is another rule that we learned from the Sifri, that whenever a person brings a carbon, you have to stay overnight in Yerushalayim. Can't bring a carbon and run away. So the question is, why do we need to have a verse by Pesach? You're bringing a carbon. You have to stay there anyways overnight because of the carbon. So Tosfos says, but what happens if someone comes Yom Tov and they don't bring a carbon? So there's this unique din, independent of the Yom Tov, demands for you to stay there overnight. You went there, you were seen, you saw, you were seen by God, so to say. You see godliness in the temple. That's the mitzvah of Re'iyah. Aside of that, stay there at night. And even though it's written only by Pesach, but that teaches for Sukkos and for Shavuos. 3rd line from the top. Now, the Tanach v'Rab Shimon, who they learn from the Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos, the din of 3 Yomim Tovim or 3 Yomim Tovim in sequence for the violation of Balta Achad. So how do they know the din that even Shavuos, which is a 1-day holiday, has compensation time to compensate and to bring the Oilas Re'iyah and the Shalmei Chagiga? Tashlum and Latzaris Min Allahu answers the Gemara Nafkelahu. They learned it from, as we learned in the Braisa taught by Rabbi Bar Shmuel, the Tani Rabbi Bar Shmuel, that Amra Torah, this is a very important limud. The Torah tells us, Minei Yomim, count days, Vekadesh Chodesh, and sanctify the month. Now, really, as Rashi explains, the Torah says count days. No, we find in the Torah, interestingly, in the portion of Baha Aloischa, when we had a failing, we complained there's not consistent meat. That falls with the manna, even though that at times slav always fell, but we wanted everyday meat. And what happened was that God's response was that there fell slav and people ate for it. The Torah says at chodesh yamim. That's the source from where we learn that Rosh Chodesh is not actually when it is. And this is a topic that we will learn a lot in this Masechta, the cycle of the moon, as we'll explain another time, is 29 days and 12 hours and 793 portions. Chavtes, Yud Beis, 793. So, and that is when the new Moilad will happen. We'll explain this another time. But that's when the new month begins. So I have a simple question. Why doesn't Rosh Chodesh begin actually when the Moilad is happening in Israel? Never happens that way. Or not never, it hardly ever happens that way. Rosh Chodesh begins by nightfall. You know why? Because since the Torah uses the words Chodesh Yamim, in other words, a month is made out of days. The day is the unit that you use to alter after, whether it's 29 days or 30 days, which we go back and forth, we alternate to more or less come close to the Moilad, then we have Rosh Chodesh. How long is Rosh Chodesh for? Since days are counted to the month, and Rosh Chodesh is a full unit. A full unit means it has to be a full day, not a middle of the day. Oh, it's a unit that is used to count a month. That one unit is Rosh Chodesh itself. Oh, so Menei Yamim v'Kadosh Chodesh. The Torah also says to count a unit of time. Yamim doesn't mean days; it means time. Count a unit of times. V'Kadosh Atzeres, and that's when we're going to sanctify Shavuos. Now, really, we have two psukim. As we know, the Torah says that we should count 7 weeks, count weeks to come to Shavuos, and the Torah says count days. But we're going to focus now on the weeks, that you count weeks, Sheva Shavuos, to come to the holiday of Shavuos. So Ma Chodesh L'Menuyav, just like Rosh Chodesh is sanctified for a period equal to one unit, which is used to come to Rosh Chodesh, count days to come to Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is for one unit. Since the units that the Torah mentions, aside of the days, is weeks, so Shavuos has to be connected to a unit of a week. Now, Shavuos is not a week. Shavuos is only one day. Must be that there is at least one halacha that is for a week. The Valdik. Kashlumen. Af atzeres l'menuyav. So the Gemara says, whoa, I get it, that we count units to come to Shavuos, but we don't only count weeks. The Torah also says, Tisperu chamishim yoim. If that's the case, Shavuos should be equivalent to one unit of a day, 60 days that's used to get to Shavuos. So if I did it, should only be for one day. And maybe if you didn't bring the Oilas Re'iyah, the Shalmei Chagiga on that day, that's it, kaput, you lost. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav, I don't understand. Otu atzeres only yoimi manina. Do you only count days? What Shavua loy manina? You count both. As the master tells us, there's a mitzvah to count days and there's another mitzvah to count weeks. So since both of these units are used to count to Shavuos, there has to be something regarding Shavuos that affects an entire week. And it's not the holiday. It's not the Yom Tov. It's only the din of Tashlumin. Now, the Rabbeinu Yeruchim is the one unique shita that holds that there's a machlekes whether before the temple is built, when we don't yet bring the carbon omer, whether the counting of the omer is a biblical obligation or is it only a rabbinical obligation. The Rabbeinu Yeruchim holds it depends. When it comes to counting weeks, in the pasuk of the weeks, it says that from the omer count 7 weeks in that pasuk. So the Shiva Shavuos is connected explicitly to the Omer. And when we don't bring yet a carbon Omer on the second day of Pesach, on the 16th day of the month, then the week part that we still count is only Midrabanan. The next verse that says Tisperu chamishim yoim, in that pasuk there is no mention of the Omer. The Rabbeinu Yeruchim holds that counting days is a mitzvah d'oraisa. To the point, if you remember, there's some machlokes, what happens if you miss one day? Do you count? Do you not count? We count without a bracha. So the Shevet Halevi, based on this Rabbeinu Yeruchim, holds that even if a person missed a day, so the mitzvah of counting days, you lost. But as long as you didn't skip a full week, you are obligated to count with the bracha every once a week. Today is 1 week. We don't paskin that way, but that's a very known chiddush, based on the fact that both days and weeks are used as units to count toward Shavuos. Now, this answer is not enough. because we just finished in the last year, in the bottom of that Dalad Amud Beis, the concept that tofasta meruba loy tofasta, tofasta meuta tofasta. I like the concept that a unit that's used to count for Shavuos will be the time of Shavuos. Well, you have a day and you have a week. Why don't we counter this answer by saying, well, tofasta meruba loy tofasta, tofasta meuta tofasta? That's why the Gemara has to give another answer. Since the name of the holiday is Shavuos, amazing. Shavuos means weeks. Really, Shavuos doesn't only mean weeks. Shavuos means oaths, because it was when God married the Jewish people, like a chuppah, and there's a double oath. God took an oath and we took an oath. We took an oath to keep the commandments. God took an oath to protect us, that we will always be his people. But since the Yom Tov is called Shavuos, which means weeks, there has to be at least one area in which there is a week connected to Shavuos, and that's going to be the din of compensation of Tashlumin. Now we are referring back to the Braisa on the bottom of that Dalad Amud Aleph. When we went through all of the different types of pledges for which at a certain point you're going to be violating Bal Ta'achar, the last one mentioned on Daf Dalad is Pesach, the Korban Pesach. Even though we're going to still have to deal, like we mentioned, tzedakos, which means charitable pledges that the Braisa puts together with the Bal Ta'achar, we're going to deal with that tomorrow on Daf Vav. We're going a little bit out of sequence. But Pesach doesn't make sense. You're only going to violate Pesach after 3 Yom Tovim. You can't even bring it. Or Pesach, or Korban Pesach, bar, mikrav, b'regolim, is it even shayach for you to bring it? Pesach, zimno kaviyalei. Pesach has a fixed time, which is the 14th, tafka in the afternoon, to shech it then, and then to eat it during Pesach. I akreve akreve, ve'ilei akreve itchalei. And since itchalei, it's only logical, as the Rishonim say over here, that you should violate Bal Ta'achar immediately, according to all of the opinions. And you do, indeed. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chizda. What we're learning now, remember for Kachim, this answer. Whenever we differentiate the unique differences between different types of karbanos, you'll notice that Bechor, Meiser means Meiser Behemo. Bechor, Meiser, and Pesach are always put together. In the karbanos that we should say every day before davening, they're also Bechor, Meiser, or Pesach. It's not just Kachei Kalim, it's unique Kachei Kalim. It's a category for its own. So indeed, the first answer is that Pesach doesn't fit here. But whenever the Tanach speaks about Bechor and Meiser, we mention Pesach. Sounds but it's not, doesn't matter. It's called Kedei Nazba. We mention it together. It really, Bal Ta'achar is not, there's no 5 opinions by Korban Pesach. It's a big doichik that. So Rab Sheshes Amar, 3 lines before the bottom. No. First of all, I agree that the Korban Pesach, if you did not bring the animal that you designated on this Pesach, right away you violate Bal Ta'achar, right away. But still, there is another Bal Ta'achar connected to that animal, and that is Pesach, my Pesach shall may Pesach, as we learned that if you don't bring a Korban Pesach, Rashi gives the example, there are many examples. We designated this animal, we lost it. So we, the group, we designated animal number 2. And we brought animal number 2. Now we found this animal. First of all, we didn't violate Bal Ta'achar. What do we do with this animal? The rule is it becomes a shlamim. And we learned a big, do you have to designate it as a shlamim? Does it automatically become a shlamim? Whichever way it becomes a shlamim. So this animal is an animal for which, let's go to Rab Shimon, that after 3 Yom Tovim pass, you're going to violate Bal Ta'achar, Kisidra. So the Gemara says, well, if Rab Sheshes is right, and Pesach refers to the animal that became a shlamim, so the Braisa already mentioned shlamim. So the Gemara says, no, it's not the same. The Braisa has to speak about shlamim haboy machmas Pesach, and also the last line in the Amid, shlamim haboy machmas atzman. One cannot be compared to the other. In which direction explains the Gemara? You would think that this animal that was a Pesach, that now became a shlamim, it began as a Pesach. So Daf Hey Amid Beis, you would think that some of the unique rules of a Pesach will be carried over to now this shlamim ke Pesach dami. What does that mean? Just like by a Korban Pesach, according to all of the Tanoim, the animal that I needed to bring for Pesach, if I didn't, I violated Bal Ta'achar immediately. The animal that we said, the cases, you lost the animal, You only found it after Pesach, but you found it before Shavuos. Maybe everyone should agree that when are you violating Bal Ta'achar? Right after Shavuos, right after one Yom Tov. Because Pesach, you violate Bal Ta'achar after the first Yom Tov, which is always going to be Pesach. So maybe the Shlamim Haboy Machmas Pesach should remain like a Pesach, that whenever it is that you found it, Beregel Rishon, that you didn't bring it, violated Bal Ta'achar, Kumash Malan, that once it becomes a Shlamim, it's like a Karban Shlamim. And when do you violate Bal Ta'achar by a Karban Shlamim? So we had the 5 opinions that we had on last year. But it doesn't carry in it this specific, unique rule of violation Bal Ta'achar immediately. Nukuda. Now, Minohan Emili, the Brais on Daf Dalid Amadal spoke about all different types of pledges and obligations that we have to the Holy Temple. Really, the pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze, in where the Torah says the words Loi Sa'acher L'Shalmoi, the Torah explicitly only speaks about pledges. I want to read the pasuk by heart. The pasuk says that Kisidoy Neder L'Hashem Alikecha. Kisidoy Neder means that you opted to make a pledge. Loi Sa'acher L'Shalmoi, don't delay to pay it up. Because Kidara Shidreshenu Hashem Alikecha, God will demand it from you. And it will be a sin if you don't bring it. So we're going to learn now a braisa that breaks apart this verse and shows you that included in every word of this pasuk is another of the many categories that are mentioned in the braisa on Davdal. So we're going to go piece by piece. The pasuk opens in Kiseitze Ki Sidoy Neder, when you will pledge. So Eli Ela Neder. A neder is a unique type of pledge where a person puts the obligation on them. They say, Harei Olai, it is incumbent upon me to bring, let's say, a shlamim. Now, there's something, we're going into a nuance. There are some times that I don't make an obligation upon myself, but I take an animal that I own and I say, this animal is a shlamim. Harei zu shlamim, that's called a nadava. How do you know that the whole lav of Lo Sa'acher also goes on a nadava? Minayim. So the answer is never kan neder. Here, Taken Kiseit say the Torah doesn't speak about Nadav. The Torah only says Kisidoy neder. But in Lahalan and Parshas Tzav, in another context, the Torah says Im neder oy Nadav. So we have a general rule that Ma Lahalan Nadav imoy Afkan, even where the Torah does not specify Nadav, neder already is including in it Nadav imoy. Next words that we have in the pasuk in Kiseit says Kisidoy neder Lashem Alikecha. Lashem Alikecha, of course, Lashem Alikecha. So Lashem Alikecha is telling you what pledge goes exclusively to God. You know what? Not karbanis. Not karbanis. Even oila, the hide goes to the owner. By all the other karbanis, some of it goes to the kahanim, some of it goes to the owners. But if a person pledges damim, like we said, a money pledge, dami olai, erchin, erki olai, we spoke it out in the last year. Charamim, he used the words chedem lebedek habayis, or hegdish. This goes only to God. That is what God is alluding to with the words Lashem Alikecha. That's also included in the law of Lo Sa'acher L'Shalmoi. Now, when it says Lo Sa'acher L'Shalmoi, hu v'lo chilufav, only for that which you designated will you violate Bal Ta'achar. But if you delay the substitute, you won't be in violation. Now, what is the substitute? We'll explain that in a moment. So let's leave that open. The Braisa continues. When it says in the verse, God says, I will demand it. What does God demand? Obligatory karbanis. Chatois, hashamois, oilos means an obligation oila. Shlamim means an obligation shlamim, like shalmei chagiga. That's Dora Shidrashenu. Then it says in the pasuk Hashem Alikecha. It says Kidora Shidrashenu Hashem Alikecha. The second time God writes Hashem Alikecha in the same pasuk. It's mamish not needed. So Elu tzedakah sumaisros. How does this refer to tzedakah sumaisros? So Rashi tells us that when it comes to the pasuk of tzedakah and maisros, we find it says that lochatia tzedakah lifnei Hashem Alikecha. Or it says v'yachalta lifnei Hashem Alikecha maiser degoncha. So the words Hashem Alikecha are including other mitzvahs where we have in the scripture the words Hashem Alikecha and a bachar. Then when it says Kidara Shidrashenu Hashem Alikecha me'imach. So what is the me'imach? From you zeleket shikchopeya. Again, Rashi tells us that the words imach is written in the Torah in the context of Leked and Shikha and Peyom. Then when it says in Kisei, say the words V'hoya b'chochet, says the Braisa, you will sin if you delay it. But the carbon itself is not sinful. The carbon itself is not invalid. The carbon still has to be brought. End of Braisa, and now let's break it down. Omar Mar, the first part that we have to clarify is when the Braisa was medayik, loisa acher l'shalmoi, don't delay it. Who is where you are going to violate? But v'loy chilufa, but not in its substitute. What exactly are we talking about? Chilufa demai, the substitute of what is a carbon in where you won't violate bal ta'ach. I chilufei oila v'shlamim, an oila shlamim, right? What happens? The case will be you designated the carbon, and then you lost it. So you designated another one. Prior to bringing the new one, the substitution one, you found the first. And you brought the first. What happens with the second? The question is, you have to bring the second. We learn about this a lot in Kachin. And if you don't bring the second, why would you not be violating Bal Ta'achar? Of course you will. Since Chilufei Oila V'Shlamim Mikrav Karbe, so it makes sense that you'll violate Bal Ta'achar. Even though you never set out to designate two animals, but that's life. You designated one, you lost the one, so you designated number two. You brought number one, you got to bring the second one. Maybe it's dafka, the substitution of a carbon chatas. If I designated carbon chatas and I lost it, and I designated another one, so we learned these are five. The halacha l'moshe misinai, the five chatois hamesois includes this one. Then lamisa azlam. Then this animal may not be brought. If it may not be brought, that's an inherent problem. Of course, you're not going to violate bal ta'achar. You're not allowed to bring it. You're not allowed to bring it inherently. Ella, perhaps, what does the Braisa mean when it speaks about chilufav, for which there is no violation of bal ta'achar? Maybe that's chilufei toida. A carbon toida is a unique type of shlamim that has similar but not the same rules, including a carbon toida can only be eaten for 1 day and 1 night, unlike shlamim that can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. And most importantly, a carbon toida has to come along with 40 loaves of bread with all of the prat. And as we'll see in a moment, that if there is a reason for which one has a substitute carbon toida, the substitute carbon toida cannot come with breads. The breads only come with the original. And as we learned, Tani Rab Chiyam, what happens if toida shenes arba b'tmurasa? Now, tumura is, until now we were speaking about an animal that you designated and then you lost it, and so you designated the substitution. We're going to learn about another type of substitution. If you have the animal, the carbon, you did not lose it. For whatever reason, you took a second animal and you said that this new one should be a temura of the first one. So the Torah says, don't make such a declaration, but if you made it, they are both holy. That will be another case where you can have two Torahs. Now, the Braisa, as the Rishonim point out, isn't only speaking about this type of doubled Torah. Whether it is a Tumuras Toida or whether it is the case that we are giving until now, it's going to be the same rule that I separated the carbon Toida and then I lost my carbon Toida. I separated another animal and now I found my original one. I have two animals and now they got mixed up and then one of them died. Umesa achas mehem. Now, if I have two animals and neither of them died, what do you have to do? Bring both and bring along 40 loaves of bread. Even though the 40 loaves of bread may only be brought with the original toida, fine. So say, whichever one is the original, to that I'm bringing the 40 loaves of bread. No problem. But if one of them died and you don't know which one died, so it says the Braisa that the living one you can't even bring. You may not bring it. You're trapped. Why? Because heichila avid. What should you do? Likirva, to bring it and to bring the breads with it. Maybe the one that died was the original. The one that's a living now is the temura, or the one that you substituted. And therefore, Dilma Tumuri and the substitute toida may not come with loaves of bread. If you bring loaves of bread when you're not obligated, they remain chulin, and you may not bring unconsecrated foods into the azara. To say, okay, bring it, at least bring it. Don't bring the breads, well, they will toida. And if it's a toida, then you may not bring a toida without breads, so you can't bring it. So here the Braisa is telling you that you're not going to violate Bal Ta'achar. I just want to make it clear. This is not like the chatos that the owner already got atonement for. It's not the same thing, right? It's not the chatos that goes lamisa. A chatos that has to be put to death, as we learned all the details elsewhere. You put it into a shed. You don't kill it. You just don't feed it, etc. That chatas is inherently not kosher. So that's why the Gemara before said shita that you're not chayev bal ta'achar. It's inherently not good. This animal is inherently good. You cannot bring it for a external reason. It's because you don't know which one it is. You don't know what to do with it. So one maybe here would have thought that maybe you're going to be chayev bal ta'achar. So the Braisa has to tell you you're not chayev, but the Gemara doesn't like it. Still, nevertheless, since you may not bring it, of course you're not going to violate bal ta'achar. I'm not delaying. God doesn't allow me to bring it. What
happens with the remaining animal?
So Yakir, what we will learn a lot in Kachim is that you have to wait until the animal gets blemished. And then once it gets blemished, you can sell it. And with its money, you buy a new animal. And for that, you bring the loaves of bread. Okay. I don't care whether it's inherently invalidated or whether there's an external reason, but if you cannot bring it, you don't need a pasuk to tell you you're not going to violate bal ta'achar if God tells me I cannot bring it. So Amar Rav Sheshes, lo oilam, let's go back to the beginning. The case of the Braisa is lemu'utei chilufei oilo shlamim. A person had an oilo, and you lost it, and you designated a new carbon. And then let's say you brought a new carbon, or you found the original one and you brought the original one. Now you have the substitute one. The Braisa has to tell you that for this substitute carbon, you're not going to violate bal ta'achar. The question is, why not? You're obligated to bring it. And here is the chiddush. You originally designated an animal. You didn't bring it the first Yom Tov, you didn't bring it the second Yom Tov. You are going on a track that if, let's go to the Tanach, no sequence. The next Yom Tov, you don't bring it, boom, you're in violation. But now, the animal became blemished. And as we just mentioned, Yakir, what happens if an animal becomes blemished? So there are different things you can do with it. One thing is, like we said, to sell it and with its money buy a new one. There's another option. You can take the blemished animal. You can take a unblemished animal and put it near one the other. You can declare zeh tacha zeh. We'll learn this in Kachin. The original animal is no longer holy, and the new animal is in its place. That's the case over here. That's the chilufov. So now I have a question. This new one, which is zeh tacha zeh, when will you violate bal ta'achar? You might think, since this new one is an extension of the original already has 2 Yomim Tovim that passed. Maybe the other olive regel echad, even if only 1 Yom Tov goes over this new animal, since it's an extension of the first, and you're going to violate bal ta'achar immediately. That's the Kamash Malon that even though it came mikoyach kama, we begin the count again. Now this answer is a great answer, but not according to Rabbi Meir, because according to Rabbi Meir, regardless, you violate bal ta'achar by any 1 Yom Tov. So what did you accomplish? So what's going to be the case of the substitute? So the Gemara says, no, the same concept. Even according to Rabbi Meir, you only violate bal ta'achar if the entire Yom Tov passed. So what happens if a person has an animal, a carbon oil, and it's in middle of Pesach, middle of Sukkot, and now it becomes blemished. And again, they don't sell it, but they take another physical animal that's unblemished, and they say zeh tacha zeh v'chiloloi during Yom Tov, and now the Yom Tov ended for all of regel. So without without that limud, you would have thought it's an extension of the first. So the whole Yom Tov went by. Commander over all of kulei regel dummy, and you're going to be chayiv bal ta'achar, even according to Rav Meir, kamash malon, no hu v'loy chilufav, that you begin to count anew. And only when a whole Yom Tov goes by, only then will you violate bal ta'achar. Now let's go back to the ending of the Braisa. The Braisa says that when the pasuk writes in Kiseitzi, v'hoya b'chochet, that in you will be the sin, that's to teach you b'chochet, the person who bal ta'achar is violating, but the animal is fine. Do we need it from these words in Kiseitze? Didn't Acherim which is really Rab Meir, he already taught us where we learn it from. The achedim is because in Hoidiyas, Daf Yud Gimel, you learn the story why for a period of time, Rabbi Meir was called with the word achedim, others. Achedim says, so Rashi adds in the following, a bachar that you gift to a kohen, who the kohen, if it's not blemished, has to bring it as a carbon. It's a mitzvah for him to bring it that year. Another nuance, like Rashi adds, in 1 year, you normally have 3 regalim. Not always, but generally in 1 year, you have 3 Yomim Tovim. So we are now in the Havamina going to use Bechar as a model for all the other Karbanis. That when it comes to a Bechar, one might have thought that if you don't bring it within the year, as you should, as the pasuk says, "Lifnei Hashem Elokecha toichlenu shana b'shana," you will think that maybe the apostle it becomes disqualified, like as if the animal has a blemish. So Talmud lemer regarding the bechar, lift the v'achalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha, and here the Torah juxtaposes many things together. Meiser degancha, that the Meiser we're speaking here about Meiser Sheni that you have to eat in Yerushalayim, that comes from grain, tiroshcha v'yetzerecha, from grapes and olives. And the bechar, which only comes from these 2 types of animals, from cattle and from soincha. So since the Torah puts together meiser includes meiser sheni, right? Makish bechar lemeiser, just like meiser, never becomes invalidated. Even though meiser is separated 1 year for itself, not 1 year for another year, but if you didn't eat meiser sheni this year, so what? There's no problem. Af bechar eino nifsal l'shana lechaverto. And the presumption will be that all the karbanis should be analogous to a bechar. Again, a bechar ideally should be consumed on that year. And normally that means that if you didn't eat it that year, 3 Yomim Tovim passed, still the achedim say that the animal is still valid. The animal is valid. So we should learn from over here that only bechar chet, below karban chet. Answers the Gemara, no. Itzrach. We need to have both. We agree with achedim. We know that Bechar has a unique din, clear that it doesn't become invalidated, but Bechar will not be enough. The Torah also has to write in Kiseitze v'hoya b'chachet v'loy b'karban chachet. Because Talkadai Techamino, that you know why, even if you did not eat the Bechar as you should have, which means in most cases, 3 Yomim Tovim passed, you know why it's not invalidated? Because Bechar, the lav bar hartzo, Bechar is not coming to atone for anything. There's no sin that happened. There's a mitzvah to give a bechor to the kohen. There's a mitzvah for the kohen to eat it during the first year. Fine, but you're not atoning for anything. But when it comes to many other cases of the Beraisa by Kachim, the B'nai Hartzoninu, maybe not a pledge, but when it comes to the Chatois and the Ashamois and the Oilois and the Shalma, you would speak about the Chiyuvim, maybe you would think that if you are obligated to bring it and you didn't bring it after a 3 Yomim Tovim, maybe it's not going to bring any atonement. So Kamash Mulan, that's why we need for all the cases, says the Gemara, let's hop one more. We have another limit for the same rule as was taught by Ben Azai. The Ben Azai Nafka, the Tanya Ben Azai. This is a pasuk that we have in Parshas Tzav. There is a unique rule called pigul. Pigul means dejected. Pigul means disgusting. What does pigul refer to? That during any one of the 4 steps of the service, which is shchita, receiving the blood, Kabbalah, walking the blood towards the altar, hoylacha, and sprinkling the blood, applying the blood to the mizbeach, known as zrika, shchita, Kabbalah, hoylacha, zrika. If the kohen who was doing that step had in his mind, and according to Rashi and Tosfos, and verbalized it, according to other Rishonim, mamish, only in his mind, that part of what needs to happen will happen beyond the prescribed time. For example, they're going to offer on the altar whatever needs to be offered, which is, let's say, the fats, not today or tonight, tomorrow. Or if they had in mind that the meat that has to be eaten, when whatever the limit is, it's going to be eaten after the prescribed time. It was just a thought. The animal becomes invalidated and one may not eat it. Now, says Ben Azai, and I want to just say the words. The pasuk in Parshas Tzav reads that the im hey ochel yei ochel mipsar zevach shloma b'yom hashlishi. If that thought was had even if the thought of eating it, that's the eating it beyond the right time. Beyond the right time, even by a shlamim, you only have 2 days and 1 night. But if you had a mind to eat it on the 3rd day, so it says, Loi yeirotze hamakriv oisoi, the one for whom it's brought won't get atonement, Loi yechoshev loi, won't be counted for him. You know why? Pigulu. That's the verse. Now the word oisoi, Loi yeirotze hamakriv oisoi, is completely superfluous. The Torah could have written, V'im, hey ochel, ye ochel, mipsar, zevach, shlomav, bayoyim hashlishi, Lo yeirotze hamakriv. Or lo yechoshev loy. It already says loy. Why do you have to say oisoi? So Ben Azai says that oisoi matamud loymer. Oh, lefi shenem. Since the Torah, and he quotes the pasuk in Kiseitze, not about having an intention of doing a part beyond the prescribed time, but the Torah is speaking about delaying it mamish. That loy se'acher l'shalmoi. One would have compared the actual delaying of bringing a carbon to having an intention of doing part of the avodah delayed. They're very similar. One would have thought, says Ben Azai, Shemeya ani afma achad nidre bebal yiratza. Maybe if you delayed bringing a carbon, however you define delaying, we have 5 opinions, but if that happened, it should become pigul-like. It should become pigul means that the animal itself should become invalidated. So that's why Talmud Leimer Oisei, that's why in the portion of Pigul and Parshas Tzav, the Torah adds the word, it becomes Pigul. Oisei beloy yeratza. Pigul is more severe. Pigul invalidates the animal itself. But ve'ein ma'acha nidrei beloy yeratza. So Ben Azai learned from a word Oisei by Pigul that differentiates and actually is teaching you that if it's not Pigul, if it's Bal Ta'acher, the animal is not invalidated. It doesn't become pigul-like. So why do we need to have the words v'haya b'chachet v'lo b'karban chachet? Ella answers the Gemara, at least according to Ben Azai, you're right. The Braisa that quoted v'haya b'chachet v'lo b'karban chachet doesn't subscribe to the limit of Ben Azai. But Ben Azai that learns it from Oisai, that is already in Parshas Tzav in Vayikra. We're going on the order. So when the Torah adds the words in Kiseitze at the end of the Chumash, it's to tell you something else. And I want to give a short intro. B'nei maminim, that everything is b'hashgacha pratis. When an event happens, that one event affects different people on different ways. And there's a story about the Holy Baal Shem Tov about it. That even when there is a reason why Reuven, let's say, needed to lose something, if that loss not only affects Reuven, it also affects Shimon, the amazing, the awesomeness of God's Hashgacha Pratis is that if there's one event that affects many people, you can't just explain it by saying, so-and-so needed to lose something. If his loss also meant your loss, then there has to be a reason why you also lost it. Whatever happens has to fit for every person equally. So what we are learning about right now is that if, God forbid, a person passes away, so their passing is because there was a reason why they needed to pass away. But then there's another layer. When they pass away, it also affects negatively the people around them. At least let's hope negatively. So we're speaking about a person's wife who passed away. I'm giving this introduction is because a person's wife, we're going to link that for certain types of sins, a person loses his wife. People very erroneously think, that if this man violated whatever we're going to read here, and that justifies him losing his wife, but because of his sin should his wife pass away? Of course not. If she passed away, there's a reason why she passed away for her. We're just trying to explain why is it that he lost his wife. I mean, even if she, for whatever the Hashgacha Pratis reason, needed to go, but why should the husband lose his wife? So there has to be something that he did which earned him losing his wife in a negative way. So Ella says, Ben Azai, meaning the sin of Baal Ta'achar affects you and not affects the passing of your wife. You would think that Hoyel V'amar Rabbi Yechanan or V'teimer Rabbi Elazar, right? They were contemporaries. That Ein Ishtoi Shel Adam Mesa Ella Im Kein Mevakshen Emenu Mamen Ve'ein Loim Machlokes Rashi Toisvis. Let's speak about Rashi. Rashi connects this concept dafka to theft. That if a person steals something and he's being asked to return that which he stole, and if the person does not pay back, even if he doesn't have, but he doesn't pay back, that is one of the reasons for which a person, God forbid, will lose his wife. And not because he stole and he doesn't pay back when he's asked for the money, that's why the wife should die. No, the wife, if she's going to pass away, that's her own cheshbon. But even if there's a cheshbon for her, the question is, why did he lose his wife? For this sin. For a person stealing and being told you got to pay back and not paying back. And how do we know that there is a link between someone, God forbid, losing his spouse with him not returning the theft? Is because King Solomon, in his great wisdom in Mishnah, who's telling people don't steal. The way he words it is, you know what's going to happen if you're going to steal, and then they're going to ask you to pay back, and then you will want to, but you won't have it anymore. If you won't be able to pay back, why would your mishkavcha literally means your bed? It's an allusion here to one's wife. Why would your wife be taken away? In other words, Shlomo HaMelech is saying, don't steal because you're making yourself vulnerable that perhaps, right, this is the risk. If you won't be able to pay it back, then there'll be a just reason for that person to lose his spouse. So for not paying back theft, a person can lose his spouse. So you might have thought, that a person who makes a pledge to God and doesn't pay it, maybe that also justifies him, God forbid, losing his spouse. So that's the so is Shitas Rashi. Tosfos argues with Rashi regarding that it's not only about theft, but there are certain violations for which he will, God forbid, lose his spouse. And v'hoya b'chachet is not when it comes bin adam lamakim, only bin adam lachaver. In other words, stealing from your fellow, not paying back is a lot more severe. Making a pledge to God, even when you're obligated, not paying, God has a lot more tolerance and patience. God is a lot more forgiving. So taka v'hoya b'chachet v'loy v'ishtachachet. Or if you don't subscribe to Ben Azai, if you don't use the word oisoi by pigel to exclude that animal that's bal ta'achad is valid, then the brisa still stands. We'll stop here, and God willing to be continued tomorrow.
Chazak Baruch, Rabbi. Excellent.
Guys, tomorrow we're going to